Yeah, looks like we have quorum. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We'll welcome everyone to the August 10th, keep going back in time, to the August 10th City of Tualatin work session. Tonight we have a few items that are pretty meaty on our agenda. First thing is the urban renewal feasibility study update, I think led by Mr. Taylor and Ms. Howard, I believe.
So good evening, Mayor, members of council. Tonight, during this work session, our consultants, Elaine and Nick, will be walking through a general update of our feasibility study and just kind of provide an overview of where we're at and the direction that we are currently going. There will be a question that both Elaine and Nick will present, but I think they're going to be fairly brief in their presentation in order to allow ample time for discussion. So we want to be mindful of council's time tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Elaine to kind of give a background and then move from there.
That sounds great. And I think Nick will be sharing his screen. So I'm Elaine Howard. I've worked with you in the past few months on urban renewal issues. And we have moved forward with a feasibility study. In talking about this presentation with your staff, we wanted to make sure what it is we're asking of you tonight. So the question for you tonight is, if the City Council agrees with the following findings that will be presented, should staff prepare a more detailed proposal for moving to the next phase of considering potential new urban renewal areas? So that is the crux of the issue that we're wanting you to say yes or no, or give us direction on, and we'll be providing a lot of information. So the information will cover just the background, feasibility of study area 1 and study area 2, and then move to questions and discussion and talk about next steps. So why is a feasibility study being conducted? Cities determined to do feasibility studies to understand if tax increment financing is an appropriate tool to use in the community to accomplish community priorities in the identified areas. Feasibility studies are a lot of times done before jumping into a full urban renewal plan, just to understand some key technical issues about the area, and we'll go through those in a minute. Just some background for anybody who might be listening tonight. We have been talking about urban renewal in Tualatin for the last few months. We have a 5-phased approach. We did a 3-part education series with the City Council, just talking about the past history of urban renewal in the community, what has been accomplished, and what the new rules are for urban renewal. Once that was completed, one of your district was closed down completely. Both districts had terminated taking tax increment revenues a number of years ago. Your central district was completely closed, and I believe your second district, the Leventon district, is left open to complete a few projects within the area. So this feasibility study that Nick's firm and my firm completed is the 3rd phase. For potential future phases are, depending on City Council's direction, whether to move forward with stakeholder input, and then whether to move forward with the creation of 1 or more urban renewal plans. This work has been done with my firm and Tiberius Solutions. Nick is the principal of Tiberius Solutions. His firm and my firm have worked together for over 10 years. He does all of the financial feasibility analysis on any projects on which our firm works. So we're very, we work well together. We know how to work together and how to present you with the best information. So Nick, I'll let you take over from here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Elaine. And I think I'm unmuted now. So as Elaine mentioned, this is sort of the middle phase of a potential multi-phase approach towards implementing urban renewal in the city after closing down the old iterations of urban renewal areas in the city. Elaine already did cover a lot of the purpose of the feasibility study, so looking to see if this is an appropriate tool. One key piece here is that the project identification, determining the boundary and assessing the financial capacity here, dealing with stakeholders, working with stakeholders would occur during the subsequent process. So this feasibility study is really very technical in nature. And tonight we're really just going to be hitting the Cliff's Notes version of the summary here, staying very high level. But based on City Council's input today, we will then come back with the final report, which will have a much higher level of detail in it, providing all the detailed tables on those financial capacity impacts to other taxing districts. But we really are in the technical weeds at this phase of the project. This is really just to determine whether legally and financially these potential urban renewal areas are feasible. If they are, and if City Council wants to move forward, there is still a big question and discussion about how they could best be used. What are the projects and programs that should be funded? What are the priorities for when those projects are funded? And is it worth the trade-off to all the overlapping taxing districts that would have to forego some of their revenue for the duration of the urban renewal area? So we are not trying to answer all of those questions tonight, but we know that those are important questions. So we just wanted to bring up that we did not forget about those questions, but they do require an awful lot of collaboration with the general public, as well as with the affected taxing districts and other key stakeholders. So when we are assessing whether or not the urban renewal area is feasible, what is it exactly that we're looking at? And a lot of times it boils down to these three very black and white technical questions here. So does the proposed urban renewal boundary comply with statutory limits on acreage and assessed value? So in that case, we are looking at 25% of the city's acreage and 25% of the city's assessed value, and confirming that the proposed boundaries are within those limits. The next question is, would the proposed boundaries generate a significant amount of tax increment finance revenue? Now, significant can be defined a number of different ways. Again, a lot of this is a little bit more subjective, but in reality, we are forecasting how much revenue could be generated here over a typical time frame, which is usually 20 to 30 years of tax increment finance revenue. And when we look at that and compare that to the general needs of the area, does it look like an urban renewal boundary could generate a substantial amount to help implement projects in the area? And as we're talking about projects, the third and final bullet point that we have here is, do the proposed boundaries have public needs that would benefit from urban renewal investment? So again, at this stage, we aren't trying to have the final project list with every known project and the exact dollar amount assigned to it, but we do want to make sure that the areas that we're looking at have real needs that the public would like to see invested in, and that those investments could pay dividends in terms of economic development and growing the tax base. So this is the map for study area 1. This is what we've been calling the North District, though if this were to move forward and have public involvement, there may be a more creative name for it than North District. When we're looking at this area, this has just shy of 600 acres of property and a total assessed value of $840 million. The area has a number of desired outcomes that have been articulated by staff and city council in recent years. So some of those desired outcomes are providing additional housing options, improving transportation systems in the area, preparing for increased density, addressing long-term vacant buildings, pursuing redevelopment opportunities, and property acquisition. When it comes to the details of those specific outcomes and what projects need to be funded and which projects would come first, we do think that there would need to be a significant amount of stakeholder input to identify that prioritized project list. And again, that could potentially happen in future phases if that's the direction the city council would like to head. Looking at the, again, very high level summary of the financial capacity here. Our analysis shows that the urban renewal area could generate over $100 million of capacity for projects in today's dollars. Again, this is capacity in today's dollars, so this already accounts for inflation over time. It also accounts for the portion of your annual tax revenue that would be needed to pay interest on bonds or loans that you incur. So when we come to our question of, is there significant financial capacity here? I think with $100 million or more, the answer is unequivocally yes. In addition to looking at that capacity, it's also important to look at the foregone revenue. So all taxing districts that overlap the urban renewal area would forego a portion of their revenue in order to pay for the projects here. The city itself is one of those impacted taxing districts, and based on the blended tax rates that are affected here, for every dollar of urban renewal revenue raised, the city's general fund would be losing out on about 19 cents. And again, here, this shows the maximum technical financial capacity of the area. There is nothing that says that based on this preliminary analysis, the city would need to establish an urban renewal area that would fund that much in projects. So again, this is just an interim step in the process, and after working with affected taxing districts and other stakeholders, the city may decide that a more scaled back approach is appropriate for this area. And there are several options available to the city to scale back the financial impact here. Some of those options on the slide show under levying the annual amount of tax increment finance revenue. So instead of the urban renewal area receiving the full amount of tax revenue each year, it could voluntarily choose to share a portion of that with the affected taxing districts. Another approach is to specify a particularly short urban renewal duration. So instead of planning to collect revenue for 30 years, it could be 20 years or potentially even less. And then another approach would be to reduce the size of the urban renewal area boundary to leave out some properties that are generating a significant amount of tax revenue, let those continue to generate revenue for the other taxing districts, and have a smaller boundary with less financial capacity that is supporting the urban renewal area. So those are all different approaches on the table that are up for consideration if the city decides to move forward. In terms of those technical questions of feasibility here, so do the proposed boundaries comply with the statutory limitations on acreage and assessed value? That answer is yes. When we look at the total acreage of the city, about 5,200, about 5,200, and we look at the total assessed value of the city at over $4 billion. This area, even combined with Area 2, would both be within the 25% statutory limits. Would the proposed boundaries generate a significant amount of tax increment finance revenue? For Boundary 1, this North District, that answer again is yes, with looking at over $100 million of projects in terms of revenue potential, though with options to scale that back if necessary. And then, do the proposed boundaries have public needs that would benefit from urban renewal investment? And again, the answer is yes, based on the desired outcomes that the city has articulated for this area. But the specific projects that could be funded here, we believe require additional refinement with public outreach, stakeholder involvement, and coordination with the affected taxing districts. Okay, we're going to run through the same results here for study area 2. This is just over 700 acres in size, including Basalt Creek in the southwest industrial area. The assessed value of property here is significantly lower than in Boundary 1 that we just looked at. This only has about 86 million of assessed value total for these 700 acres. Desired outcomes for this area include infrastructure improvements, preparing for increased density, greenfield development, property acquisition, and mimicking the great success of the Leviton urban renewal area. Once again, stakeholder input can be used to identify the specific project list, though in this area, because it has been the subject of more recent master planning, there is a much better idea of the specific infrastructure investments that would be needed to open up this land for development and allow it to achieve its full potential. When we look at the financial capacity here, again stated in today's dollars, we're looking at between $14 million to $26 million of capacity to fund projects in the area. The range of capacity is directly related to the amount of new development that occurs in this area over time. So urban renewal areas that are most effective are the ones that are able to invest in projects right away that open up land for taxable development, putting more money on the tax rolls that generates more tax increment finance revenue and allows you to fund more projects quickly and then close down the area quickly. Once again, this area, like the other, would also have foregone revenue impacts to all overlapping taxing districts. Given the tax rates in question here, the impacts are a little less to the city's general fund, though I believe with annexations over time, that would start to even out. And then the chart that's shown on this page is an illustration of when the urban renewal financial capacity might occur over time. So we talk about $14 to $26 million of capacity, but not all of that capacity is available on day one. The blue bars on this chart are showing dollars per year that the city could invest into projects in the area. And so we see in the early years, there might be the ability to fund roughly $1 million worth of projects early on, but then it would be small dollar amounts each year until there's sufficient capacity to borrow money again, fund another few $1 million of projects, then wait for the tax revenue to grow again for a few years before you go out and borrow and finance another few million, and so on and so forth. So the gray area on the chart represents the annual TIF revenue. Blue bars are representing the money that's actually spent on projects. And this can show how in a typical urban renewal area, you use those borrowings, either bonds or bank loans, to accelerate the timing of funding projects, but that comes at the cost of paying interest and debt service over time. And that's the chart that we see here. So again, in terms of the three questions we're looking at, do the proposed boundaries comply with statutory limits on acreage and assessed value? Yes, we are within 25% of the city's limits on assessed value and acreage. Would the proposed boundaries generate a significant amount of tax increment finance revenue? And again, yes, we are looking at somewhere between $14 to $26 million of revenue that could be generated over a 30-year period. And do the proposed boundaries have public needs that would benefit from urban renewal investment? And once again, yes, with this area having a number of infrastructure deficiencies that have been identified, that urban renewal could help fund to jumpstart taxable development in the area. So long story short, for both of those urban renewal area, potential urban renewal areas, from a technical perspective, it does look like they are feasible. What does this mean going forward? Well, if the city decides that not only are they technically feasible, but they are desirable in terms of being able to help the community, then we'd be looking at next steps. And those next steps should emphasize stakeholder input. Those stakeholders include the affected taxing districts, as well as local property owners and business owners in the area, and then community members and the general public. So all of them will have valuable insight that can help the city craft potential urban renewal areas and make sure that the priorities there really do represent the priorities of the communities. It's important for both the Boundary 1 and Boundary 2, the North District and Basalt Creek, to do this type of stakeholder input, but it appears to be particularly important for the North District due to lack of a clear vision and lack of a clear project list in that area. In addition to the stakeholder input, it is important to foster meaningful collaboration with affected taxing districts. So I do believe that there are a number of taxing districts that are watching tonight's meeting. They were invited by the city manager to pay attention to tonight's presentation, to know that this conversation is ongoing, and to know that if the city moves forward, they will be an important partner because they are directly affected financially. And the city, we recommend that the city make sure that those taxing districts have a say in what projects are being funded, understand that those are important projects to the city and the citizens that are served, and that those projects are worth the financial trade-off from the foregone revenue. Another one of our recommendations is to leave all options on the table at this time. This goes hand in hand with the next bullet of for Boundary 1, explore creative approaches to capitalize on strong financial capacity while mitigating the long-term impacts to taxing districts, including the city itself. So as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, that boundary 1 seems to have a very strong amount of financial capacity, and there are ways to explore having a successful urban renewal area there without having an adverse impact on the other taxing districts. And so looking at some options for voluntary revenue sharing or a shorter duration or a smaller boundary, we think that those are all valid options that should be on the table and things that should be discussed with the affected taxing districts. And then the final recommendation here would be for city staff to draft proposals for next steps to be brought back at a later date. So in particular, we are not looking for any specific direction tonight. This is really educational and a chance to ask questions. After tonight's discussion, we will finalize the actual feasibility study report. But if the city has a clear general direction they would like to head, then staff can prepare those specific proposals, and there will be a later time for city council to take action to move towards the next phase of considering urban renewal areas. So more specifically for District 1, if council wishes to proceed, then there would be an official review of the feasibility study. Again, no official action needs to be taken on that. It is a technical background document. And then next, staff will draft an outline and proposal on how to proceed with moving into phase 4. We can talk tonight about some other communities in the area: Cornelius, Scappoose, Milwaukee. Elaine and I have worked with all of them in recent years, and they have taken an approach where they did a larger town center plan or strategic visioning plan to help really capture the city's vision for what they would like to see happen there before embarking on a specific urban renewal plan. In District 2, we've got similar looking bullet points here: official review of the feasibility study with no official action needing to be taken, and then staff drafting an outline and proposal for how to proceed into phase 4. However, phase 4 for District 2 may look a little bit different. Again, there is more clarity already on the types of projects that should be funded there. And so when we're talking about public involvement for District 2, the south area, that public involvement could occur at the same time as preparing an urban renewal plan. And Elaine can answer questions tonight about what that type of public involvement looks like, but it typically includes an advisory committee with members of the public as well as affected taxing districts, grappling with the issues of the final boundary, impacts to taxing districts, what the right projects are, etc. And to reiterate the question for council tonight, if you agree with the findings that urban renewal is technically and financially feasible here, then should staff prepare a more detailed proposal for moving to the next phase of considering potential new urban renewal areas. And that is the end of our formal presentation. So I will stop sharing now and turn things over to the City Council for discussion.
All right. People are scattered here on my screen. So go ahead and raise your hand if any of the councilors have questions. I see Valerie, so Valerie's first.
Okay, what's new? My question was on the Basalt Creek area. I think that's area 2. And how does that work with that? I mean, how do we do, I guess it's the timing thing of creating an urban renewal area in an area that's not annexed in the city yet. I mean, one part's going to be, but eventually it probably will all be here, but how does the timing of that work? Do you just go with the annex part in the urban renewal area and then expand it as the other parts of that area are annexed into the city?
So this is Elaine, I'll take that question. So you may form, the city council may form an urban renewal area in both property within your city limits and property that is not in your city limits, but is within your urban growth boundary. To be able to do that, the county also has to approve the urban renewal plan. So if it's all just within your city, the county doesn't get that vote to also approve. But in this case, the county would also have to approve. Nick and I have worked with Washington County on other urban renewal plans where they've had to do that. And we find them very very good to work with and very understanding of developing capacity, especially on those industrial lands.
Thank you. And then I have one other quick question is on the area one, the north area. If like we were to proceed with that, what is the time frame between it's got to be a fairly long process from start to all the stakeholder input. So how long would it take till an actual urban renewal district would be in place approximately? I know you can't give exacts.
So I'll take that one also. The formation, once you start with an advisory committee, the formation of an urban renewal area, if everything moves kind of month by month the way you hope it does, takes about 6 months. It can be elongated to 9 months fairly easily. So in terms of thinking about the Basalt Creek area, I would think within 6 months you probably could have an area plan in front of City Council. For the other area, we've had quite a few talks about this. I think that within a year, you could be prepared to have an urban renewal plan adopted. So I think both Nick and I think that by October of 2021, before October of 2021, if you decided to move forward with both, you would be able to do that so that the timing on implementation could be the same if that's what you wanted.
Thank you.
Other questions? Robert.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. This is really I look at it as a tremendous opportunity. In terms of engaging stakeholders and the public, I know we don't have a specific plan for this, but just in general, what's the approach?
So I'll take that again, since usually it's my firm that does the moving forward from a feasibility study. We keep Nick tied into us through the whole way, but we usually do that part. So typically an advisory committee is formed. That advisory committee usually is comprised of taxing districts. Some of those are on the call tonight. Usually a city council member or mayor, a planning commission member, community advocates. The minimum amount that we say though that group should meet is 3 times, and if you do that, it's usually talking about the boundary in the first meeting, about potential projects in the second meeting, which is usually a month later, and then talking about the financial capacity and how that relates to those projects in the third meeting. Sometimes there's a fourth meeting where we go through the entire urban renewal plan with the committee. Sometimes they want to do that. So that for, especially for the industrial district, that process works well. That's a process that we've used time and time again throughout the state, and it works really well. In terms of the other district, there's probably some front end to that to talk more about community visioning that our firm could be involved in, but may also have input from a planning firm that it does more of that kind of process.
Okay, and just generally, what's the public, the general public, residents, businesses at they're given some notice and have an opportunity to speak for a few minutes at the meeting, submit written testimony, that sort of thing?
There are 3 required formal meetings for the adoption of an urban renewal plan. So it has to go to your urban renewal agency in a formal meeting. So those are open and the general public could come to any part of that. There's a planning commission meeting to find conformance to the comprehensive plan. We always recommend that the planning commission take testimony at that meeting. There's a required city council hearing where you are required to give notice to all citizens through one of 4 different procedures, either utility bills, voting records, postal patrons, and there's one other one. Anyway, so everybody gets a notice to that. And you take testimony at that. You may add in other layers if you desire. I know we're working in Newburgh on a plan, and we added in We always have a couple open houses. In COVID-19, it's a little more difficult to do those. So we did online information sessions, and the city is taking feedback from those. So having, an public open house is much more difficult now, but we have found other ways of giving out that information and allowing people to ask questions.
Well, it sounds very comprehensive. Thank you.
Other questions? Paul?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. That was really nice, and I appreciate all the work and the 4-step process that you've been taking us through over the last, I don't know, it seems like 6 months, maybe it's a little bit longer, maybe it wasn't quite that long. I'm a little confused by the one slide though, and I actually meant to bring this up in my conversation with our city manager, because the one slide, it's study area number 1, financial capacity. I'm confused by the 100 million plus, and exactly who it's 100 million plus for. And if you can give me a little bit better breakdown on actually where that money, that 100 million, and I'm assuming that's taxing revenue, and I'd like a better breakdown. And the second line really confused me because I wasn't aware that we had a 19% tax rate on our city. So I'm hoping that's a typo and not a real number.
Yeah, so I can take that one. On the tax issue, well, actually, I guess I'll handle them both at the same time. So the money that we were showing there is the amount that the urban renewal area would have to spend on projects. Where the urban renewal area receives that funding from is from the annual tax increment finance revenue. That tax increment finance revenue is a larger amount than the 100 million that was shown. So there is the tax dollars that come in every year. We would add that up over a 20 or 30 year period of time for the urban renewal area. That would be the total tax increment finance revenue. And all of that would be foregone from the other taxing districts. So instead of $1 going here to the schools and here to the county and here to the fire district, instead that money is going to the urban renewal area. Each of those districts is impacted proportionately. So this is all based on the permanent property tax rates of each jurisdiction. And when we add up all of the permanent property tax rates for all the overlapping districts in that north area, the city's tax rate is 19% of the total of all overlapping taxing districts. And again, that's only permanent. That's not local option levies and not general obligation bonds. So I was mentioning how you'd have your total impact that's based on the actual amount of TIF revenue collected. A portion of that would be spent directly on projects, and a portion would be paid back to interest. You're borrowing money over time to spend on capital projects and then paying annual debt service payments, some for principal, some for interest. Urban renewal plans require that you identify the total amount that you're spending on capital projects, and that is your maximum indebtedness. But that dollar amount is reported in nominal year of expenditure dollars. So if you're going to build a project 20 years from now and it costs $50 million in 20 years, even if it only costs $25 million today, for maximum indebtedness purposes, if you're funding it, you count it at $50 million. In today's presentation, because it really was just the high level notes, we were trying to cut to the chase. We then converted all of that future expenditures back in today's dollars, adjusting for inflation, so we could really focus on what the magnitude of your financial capacity is. And that maximum, that capacity in today's dollars is what we were showing there. So we're showing the urban renewal area could fund up to $100 million worth of projects in today's dollars that would be funded through impacts to the other taxing districts in terms of foregone revenue. We were really showing the high level notes here. And again, we will, based on tonight's feedback, finalize our report for you all. And that will have the nitty gritty details where you'll be able to see all those interim steps that we sort of skipped by tonight on the calculations.
Hey,
Thank
Nick,
you.
if you don't mind, just clarify again what tax increment finance is and where it comes from and what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I feel bad we didn't have a slide in here. Elaine and I have done these presentations so many times. There's usually a slide that illustrates this. But when we're talking about tax increment financing, So you create a new urban renewal area. There is already some assessed value in that area. That becomes the frozen base. Over time, the value in the area will grow, and the taxes that are generated from the frozen base value continue to go to the overlapping taxing districts, but the taxes generated from that increment value will be known as tax increment finance revenue, or TIF revenue, and that's what funds the urban renewal area. And it starts off very small in the early years, but then grows and can be quite substantial in the later years.
All right. Bridget.
There it is. Hi, thank you for your presentation. And I just, since we're doing a big over view, I want to say that especially for me, District 1 is exciting to have a lot of potential. To me, I could, the area has needs, the population, and there's just a lot of needs, I think. And I'm curious from other projects that you've done with planning, and the same with, also with the other area as well, as far as what an opportunity is to be able to do some things that would benefit the community. And I'm just curious from other projects that you've worked on, what some examples are of things that cities have done with the urban renewal money.
I can go here, but Elaine can also chip in. There have been a huge wide range of types of projects that urban renewal areas fund across the state. And the most effective urban renewal areas do have a clear vision for what they want to accomplish. So we talked earlier about some of these other communities. Moving Forward Milwaukee did a big visioning exercise. The Cornelius Town Center Plan was a big visioning exercise. So the specific projects that they came up with were ones that they knew the citizens were really excited and passionate about and would make a big difference to the community. In terms of what they could look like, almost every urban renewal plan will include some type of pipes and pavement, old-fashioned infrastructure. There are streets that don't have enough capacity. There are sites that are lacking the fundamental infrastructure that they need to be development shovel ready. And investing in infrastructure can pay big dividends. The overlapping taxing districts who are foregoing revenue, they also tend to really appreciate those infrastructure investments. They know that they're being asked to give up their revenue for a period of decades. They'd like to see the tax base be higher because of these urban renewal investments so that everybody benefits long term. Other projects that we've seen communities invest in include in, say, city of Beaverton, funding for a performing arts center, although it received a lot of other privately raised funds as well. Structured parking garages can make a huge difference in terms of opening up surrounding areas for development. And then investment into specific businesses, whether it's storefront improvement programs or other loans and grants to be able to really help revitalize the existing businesses in the community. Elaine, are there other examples you'd like to highlight?
You did a great job, Nick. I think one other example that may resonate a little bit is in the Tiger Triangle. That was an area that was adopted a couple of years ago that we worked on. And in Tiger, their vision was to make it the most walkable community in Oregon. So they were really intent on creating housing, creating pedestrian pathways, areas that would encourage housing development, so providing those kinds of amenities. And so their vision was to enliven that Tiger Triangle that was full of kind of big box stores and streets that definitely weren't walkable. So those kinds of things. The other thing that you see in communities a lot, and you did some of this in your Central Urban Renewal District, is just trying to provide the amenities that provide a sense of place to a community, that make a community feel like there are areas in their city that encourage people to congregate, encourage people to support their city, encourage businesses to locate. So those are often types of activities that are encouraged through urban renewal. And in addition, I mean, as Nick said, basic infrastructure, it usually takes up the majority of any urban renewal plans funding.
Yeah, and Elaine, one more I think we'd be remiss not to talk about is affordable housing. It has often been a significant component of urban renewal plans, and even more so over the last 5 years or so, as we've had such a bad housing crisis across the state.
And can I ask a follow-up question with that? When I think of Area 2 and the green space that we'll lose, does it support keeping green spaces in areas that we're developing more as well?
It could.
Like parks, and so that if you're going to densify areas that you can, I know right now there's a big conversation about preserving trees. So, you know, is that possible, or have people utilized the funds planning that way?
It is possible. One of the things that we do when we work with advisory committees is balance those projects. And what you will hear from other taxing districts is they would like the tax increment revenues spent on projects that they think will increase the tax base, because for them, that's the benefit of an urban renewal area. So if you make decisions to invest in projects that don't do that, a lot of urban renewal areas have some of those projects, you just have to be careful about it and look at all of your other funding sources and make those discussions open with your taxing districts to make sure and get their input on it.
Oh yeah, I just, especially with building and housing, just having livable housing is pretty much what I'm focused on. So not just everything being a park, but all right, thank you.
Other questions? All right. I don't have a lot of questions. So the phase we're in now, so the report, when do you envision that being wrapped up by?
Well, the reports are actually fully drafted and waiting on my laptop right now. Just wanted to make sure that we had a chance to check in with City Council tonight before we sent over our final version to staff for their comments. And then after staff review, coming back to City Council. So this would all take place over the next couple of weeks, that you'd have a final report on your desk.
And on average, on phase 4, the stakeholder input, knowing that we know now that more likely this will have to all be done over Zoom, have you done anything, or what's best practices right now with Zoom? Because it might be a little bit more difficult. The ways, I guess it might be a little easier, but in other ways more difficult to get people together on a Zoom meeting for stakeholders. And when you combine stakeholders such as those folks who have a stake in the game as business owners, or as folks who receive some of that tax funds, and also residents in the area. So, Elaine, you were mentioning sometimes, most of the time, everything goes perfectly well, 3 months, but that's back when people actually met in person.
No,
correct?
actually, and we have on the call, I think, Cassandra from TVFNR, who's working on the Newburgh, she's on that advisory committee. We had, I think, 1 or 2 meetings in person, and all the rest of the meetings have now been on Zoom. Lincoln City, we had the same thing. Our first couple of meetings were real meetings, and then all of a sudden we turned into Zoom meetings. And I think we're all figuring out how to navigate it, even though to me, I like being face-to-face with people. However, it seems to work, and it seems to work pretty well.
Okay.
So It's a little more awkward and we have to figure it out, but it is working.
Does it elongate the process? Have you seen it?
It
stretch
hasn't
the process out a
seemed,
little bit or about the
it
same?
hasn't seemed to have, but we haven't started one from scratch. So these would be from scratch. In the others, we had met with those groups at least once. So it might.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm glad to hear you've got experience doing some of these meetings already via Zoom. That, like you're saying, the experience part of it's critical because when you've learned the gotchas, then you look a lot more professional and things move along better.
And Mayor, to both Elaine and Nick's point, during the Tualatin 2040 project, we built a vast list of emails and outreach and contacts. And luckily with the community developments work last year, we've got a pretty good head start on what I think other communities would be at this time. So.
Perfect. Any other questions? Council direction for staff. They're looking, let me scroll down here. Is everybody okay with both the analysis to continue on both areas, 1 and 2? Getting thumbs up, right? And I guess, do we agree with, should staff prepare a more detailed proposal for moving to the next phase of considering potential new urban renewal areas? See, thumbs up, thumbs up. Paul?
I have a question.
Sure.
Really for staff, and I didn't think of this earlier. I would have included it in my first comments. What's the time constraints? This probably would be to Aquila or to Charlene. What's the time constraints of looking at both versus just starting with the north boundary for the time being, where it's my perception that that's where the obviously the greater need is, versus looking at everything together? Or is it just the time constraints don't matter because it's whether you're doing 1 or whether you're doing 2, it's the same? Is there any clarity on that?
It's a good question, Councilor Morrison. I don't know that there would be any, if you're asking like capacity wise, would it be more difficult for us to move forward with both of them at the same time rather than one and then the other? I don't think that there's any more difficulty. I think we could move forward with both of them. Although just reflecting back on what Elaine and Nick were saying, that area 2 will probably move along a little bit quicker than area 1. Does that kind of get at what you were asking, or?
Well, yes and no. I mean, now I'm hang on. Let me go back to the thing. Area 1, which is Area 1 is kind of to me, it's clear cut. It appears to be it's Bridgeport and it's the Commons area, if I understand it correctly, along with an extension of TS Highway. Area 2 gets more confusing because it's clearly a large portion of it is Basalt Creek, but then there's another area that would develop relatively quickly. But with Basalt Creek, part of it, I mean, we're looking at annexation plans. We just annexed in some of the land. We're annexing some other land, but those are specifically for plans that are already well along the way with respect to housing. And so that clearly wouldn't be I don't think, or maybe it would be a part of the boundary, even though they're already under construction over there. You see what I'm saying? So I'm confused about why we'd be looking at one area when there's already a lot of activity, and that would be area 2. Sorry for the confusion. Versus, do we want to? And even better yet, I think a better question is: does the council want to focus in on one area where we can get something accomplished, maybe at a faster pace, versus looking at all these broad areas and not necessarily get anything done, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I understand what you're asking then is more the long-term effect of getting an urban renewal district not only adopted, but then seeing some development occur in those areas. And part of, I guess, the way I was answering it is just around what it would take to actually get those urban renewal areas established. Part of the reason for looking at that Basalt Creek area is because there is so much infrastructure needed. And so we would want to include the areas that are annexed, applying to annex, and then the areas that are in Washington County as well. And that will just help get the development spurred if we're able to build infrastructure from the tax increment financing dollars. So I think there's a good reason to include all of that land in there. But you're right. I mean, it will take a little bit longer just to generate the same amount of tax increment financing.
Well, and Councilor Morrison, the north area, I'm not sure can see development happen as quickly, or the front end work that's going to be required to do some visioning and to project list development will take some time. And as opposed to the area 2 that has some more, it's pretty clear what needs to happen in the list of projects. So the north one could be extended out. I don't know what Elaine thinks, but a while we do visioning and come up with a good project list. And so my recommendation would be that that we move forward with finishing up the feasibility study, the final report, and then we bring forward what those next steps would be and look like, and that you can talk about that then for both of them, and then you can decide whether to move forward with one and not the other.
Like the way I look at it, Paul, it's kind of like doing your due diligence and getting your research done on both options, and then obviously decide with the wealth of knowledge and what's going to be in that report will give us a better idea of how to proceed.
No, I understand that. I just was concerned about maybe it just seemed like quite possibly we were taking on too much, but the comments from both Aquila and Charlene, I'm fine with that. Then I get that, so it's all good.
All right. So it sounds like you got the direction, Charlene?
Yes, thank you.
I read your lips for that one. Yep.
Thank you, and thanks to Elaine and Nick and Jonathan and Aquila for all the work.
Yeah, thank you all. All right, on to the next item, parks asset costs. And as my change starts flickering here, I'm assuming this is Ross and Rich.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Mayor and councilors. Appreciate tonight's opportunity to continue our conversation about parks asset costs and really the infrastructure within our park system. We have been extremely fortunate in Tualatin to have a fantastic park system that has been loved by so many for so many years. And many of the assets and the infrastructure within our parks are really at that point in their life cycle where they are ready for replacement. And so this is the continuing conversation of that need and really an opportunity to bring to you specific costs by type, by class, and we'll get into that in just a second. And an opportunity for us within the park system to continue to maintain our infrastructure and our assets, amenities within our park system that really impact our community's quality of life and the experiences that people have in groups and youth sports, in festivals and events, and throughout our park system and with different activities and events throughout the year. So we'll jump into the first slide here. Many of you have seen this slide. Or the table on the right will be familiar to you. We presented this at the last council meeting in June. And so you can see the breakdown of assets or amenities that were scored within our system. 739 total assets or amenities were scored on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being like new or brand new, in fantastic condition, fully accessible, and ready for many years of service. So those are the ones. 12% of our system, the amenities within our system are 1s. The 5s on the other end of the scale, those are the amenities or assets in our system that are at the end of the life cycle, pose a safety hazard, have accessibility issues, and really issues that have an urgent need based on those criteria. And then, of course, 3s are right in the middle. And so you can see the breakdown. What we'll be focusing on tonight for costs are the 4s and 5s. So the 23% of our system, which is scored a 4, and 19% of our system, which is scored a 5, 42% make up 42% of the assets and infrastructure amenities within our park system that are at the end of their useful life, are a safety hazard, or not accessible. And so Rich is going to talk a little bit about specifically what's included and what's not included in these scores.
Good evening. What's included in the cost estimates that'll be presented to you tonight? Renovation and replacements of existing park facilities and assets. This does not include new or expansion features or amenities, and ADA improvements where they're connected with park projects that were scored a 4 or 5 only. What's not included, building, structures, and interior replacements, natural resource restoration and maintenance. Not all the ADA improvements identified in the ADA plan are included in the numbers that you'll receive tonight. And utility renovations and replacements, such as main water lines in the interior of parks, drive aisles, vehicle drive aisles, or parking areas are not included in the numbers that you'll see tonight. No new property acquisition is included.
Thank you, Rich. So of our system and throughout our system, the 5s are the most urgent need. These are items that pose a safety issue or really detrimental to community use in some fashion. And so here are a few examples of the 5s. So the boat ramp at Tualatin Community Park, the surface at Tualatin Commons. You can see in this image, we've got a lot of surfaces like this that are potential trip hazards that we are addressing within our operations budget. Actually, this year we're doing some grinding of those uneven surfaces. In our budget, we've included $10,000 for that work. As you'll see, as we get into the numbers, we're taking steps, but the apple is large, and so we're taking small bites at this point. And so this is really an opportunity to take a look at that whole apple. And then, of course, Stone Ridge Park. You can see the images. It looks like assets and amenities and infrastructure that are aged and really need to be replaced. These are our 5s. So those are just a few examples. In total, a total number of assets that are 5s, a total capital need of around 7.4. This is in today's dollars. We have 140 amenities that are ranked, that are scored a 5. What this doesn't capture, and what I think is important here, of that 140 total projects, some of them are very small scale. Some of them are, you know, a $1,000 sign or entry sign into a park, for example. Others are large scale needs, capital needs. So, for example, the boat launch at Tualatin Community Park is an example of that, you know, which is in the millions of dollars, several $1 million for that boat ramp replacement. So these are our 5s. These are the most urgent need that we need to address.
After the 5s, we have facilities, amenities, and features in the parks that were scored 4s. Some examples of 4s are the lower turf at Equality Park. It's really not playable. Our youth sports don't use it. It's too wet due to lack of drainage in the winter. It gets real dry in the summer. It's uneven and not in great condition. Several of the pathways around the community need replacement. They're aging out. You can see the Chieftain Dakota asphalt has tree roots cracking in it. We've got some concrete paths that are cracked and have uneven surfaces. Little Woodrose, just about the entire park or natural area at Little Woodrose were scored 4s and 5s. And here's an example of the stairway leading up from the neighborhood and the condition of that. The soft surface trails, many of the steps in Little Woodrose as well, fencing, all those amenities and features at Little Woodrose scored in the 4s. The total cost for amenities, facilities, and features that scored 4s was just over $4 million. And it takes into consideration 170, I wouldn't say project, but 170 amenities, features, facilities within the park system. Here's an example of some. Again, stairways, wooden trash cans, wooden benches. We have fencing. There's some signage and bollards. That's Brown Ferry Park. It's an overlook to the river that the wood is, the condition of the wood is decayed.
You can see the total cost for 4s and 5s. These are our most urgent need items, is around 11.5 million. We are certainly, as we approach this challenge, we look at the whole apple. As we operationally take bites out of that apple, we know that these 4s and 5s are going to continue to age, and so will continue to pose problems. So it's not just the 4s and 5s. As we look at the next slide, which kind of gives you a breakdown of assets by score, and gives you an idea about the timeline, that how we're approaching this and how we're thinking about this. The 4s and 5s we really need to take a bite out of this and accomplish 4s and 5s in the next 5 years approximately. And the reason for that is we don't want to get in this position again. We don't want to fall behind. We want the 3s, as the 3s are aging, as 31% of our system is in that 5 to 10 year range of life left in it. We want to be in a position in 5 to 10 years to accomplish those replacements and renovations, as they will be 4s and 5s in the next 5 to 10 years. And really, as we approach all of our capital projects in Parks and Rec, and as we're thinking about where do we start, obviously safety, ADA equity and access. We think about those areas, those equity opportunity areas within our community, where we know we will have an impact from an equity approach and equity lens. Also, environmental sustainability. As we're looking at these needs, these 42% of our assets that are 4s and 5s, where can we make improvements that make us more environmentally sustainable? How do we make improvements where we can use less water, where we're enhancing and impacting our community from an environmental perspective? And then lastly, but certainly not last in importance, is operational sustainability. Of these 4s and 5s, where can we focus? And as we're making renovations and improvements to these spaces and places where people are gathering, how do we make them operationally sustainable? How do we make it so that it costs less to maintain? We can do that through cost efficiencies. Through example of that is LED lighting on athletic fields rather than the old bulbs we currently have. Projects like that within this, that's sort of how we're approaching all of our capital needs, and that's how we're currently approaching them. So this is, as I said before, we don't want to get back to this situation, which is why we started this process, which is why we scored our assets and really took a good look in the mirror at ourselves and in our infrastructure within parks, so we can avoid this in the future. And so what we'll just kind of talk about next is how we're planning to approach this and what we'll bring to you next. And so in our thinking, and we wanted to throw this out, Council and Mayor, is the first step is to bring back comparables. How have other communities dealt with a challenge like this? How have they turned this challenge into an opportunity to enhance and improve their communities and their parks infrastructure? The second is to look at those funding opportunities again and look at ways we can accomplish this through different funding mechanisms. And then third is at the next council meeting in the current plans is to bring back to you data collected from the National Community Survey and bring those results back to you at the next council meeting. And Megan will bring those and present those to you at the next meeting. So we wanted to have an opportunity for you to ask questions, or if we can provide further information at any next council meeting in the future. We would love to be able to do that to better inform you and make good decisions about how we approach this.
Questions? Nancy.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate having everything categorized and laid out so well. Obviously, I'm sure I'm feeling the same way most other counselors are as far as the number of things that have fallen into the 4 and 5 category. 42% of our assets are in desperate need of something, either replacement, repair. And I'm wondering, we just passed our new budget, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 2 months ago. And I'm wondering, the allotment in the budget for this department, I guess, as a whole, did anything in that budget address any of this, or was it sort of just like the year-to-year status quo, if you will, of the budget, so that we just maintain the parks at the level that they are currently? And my part 2 of that is, this makes me feel like we've been underfunding like year after year after year. And I was wondering, did that issue come into a discussion as we were preparing the budget this year and making, recommendations by department?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, as I mentioned, there are allocations within the budget within this current fiscal year that do take bites out of the aging infrastructure in parks. However, if you look at the total, the need is far greater. And so while operationally, and quite honestly, our operations in parks maintenance and facilities maintenance staff are the reason why these assets are still functioning. They have kept them going and done a fantastic job to do so. We are at the point where this is a capital need. Whereas if we look at how we have funded other infrastructure within the city, whether that be streets, sewer, there's a mechanism, there's a defined allocated mechanism separate from the operating budget that pays for infrastructure projects. And so that sort of ongoing capital need is not going to go away. Parks currently doesn't have a mechanism in place to fund that on an ongoing basis.
So if I could just jump in and add to what Ross said, we do take into account the needs primarily through the capital improvement planning, that document, but there's just not enough money for everything, right? And a number of things got funded this last year in the capital plan, as well as the year before, the Equality Playground, the splash pad at the Commons, IBAC Park, the surfacing and the playground. And some of that came from grants. We have been successful in going after grants, and then the general fund capital, but there's just, it's just insufficient to keep up on everything. So I would agree with you. We probably have underfunded it proportionally to the other needs. It's a juggling act that just doesn't have enough funding to do everything.
Okay. Other questions? Valerie. And then Maria after Valerie.
Hi, Ross. I was wondering, I know we've had in these fires, I've seen things I know in Browns Ferry Park, we had to close that bridge, and in Little Woodrose Park, someone took care of this, but there was a wooden bench that had broken. There's a giant piece of rebar sticking up, and I wonder, how you go about, is it Tom and his crew, or how you go about, some of these things are just accidents waiting to happen, and I'm wondering how you assess that and take care of that. And before I get off with you, I just wanted to call out Tom for, our maintenance crew. They do an amazing job of keeping this put together with the money they have and their crew. They're just fantastic.
Yeah, great, good question. So operationally, as things are breaking, our teams respond and close amenities where we have safety issues. If a bench breaks, as you mentioned, taking that bench out or closing that bench. And as our system continues to age, and you see the 4s and 5s, we're looking at doing more of that. And so that's kind of on the operation side. Triage, dealing with the problems, and closing or pulling things out as needed, and will become more of our reality as these things continue to age. So really operationally, there's only so much we can do. It's really a question of capital, larger ticket replacements and renovations that's needed.
Ross, thank you for your presentation. So you are asking of us to, first of all, look at the areas of need, right, of greatest need. And then you're asking of us to decide how we're going to fund this, and where is it going to come from? Or do you have any ideas of where this money is going to come from? And of course, we've done this before, and we've talked about this in the past, but I feel like we get the presentation again. This is like the 5th time I see the presentation. So I just want to know, what do we do now? What do you want us to do now in order for us to understand what you're asking of us to do today?
Yeah, thank you. As we have, this has been a incremental progression. As we presented each meeting, we've brought new information to you. At this meeting, the dollar amounts, it was really the focus, and so that was the new information presenting to you tonight. And yes, there are various sources, and we've discussed those through some different mechanisms. Utility fee obviously was one that's been discussed in the past. A levy has also been discussed, as has a bond. So we will bring information back from that survey tool and that Megan will present at the next council meeting. And we will also bring back comparables. How have other cities turned this into an opportunity to reinvigorate and replace those aging amenities within their park system? So we'll bring that back to you, and any other information that you might want or need for the next time we meet, we'd be happy to bring that as well, if there's anything specific.
Okay, so you're presenting new information, and then next, for us to just learn the new information that's out there, and then next meeting when you come back, or next council meeting, you'll let us know what kind of information you collected from either levies and utilities, and then when do we decide from that meeting? Do you want us to like say, okay, it's gonna be this, then we choose which areas of greatest needs are gonna be funded first, or is that something that's gonna be another meeting?
Yeah, so I think, so the next council meeting, Megan will bring to you specific survey results that will help inform you. We'll bring back comps. At a following council meeting, not next meeting, we will bring to you that information, and we'll provide it to you. And yes, we would ask at that future meeting, council, for you to have a conversation about which source, based on the data that we've collected and the comps, which source fits best. What's the best path forward? What's the best mechanism to accomplish this need?
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Bridget.
Hi. Thank you both for your presentation, and I think the pictures are really helpful as well. What I liked about this presentation is the same thing that other people had talked about, with putting the dollar amounts in specific examples. And when I think about what we've done with the transportation bond and having those projects listed and having everything identified, I think it's really important for people to understand really clearly, including myself, like what this big percentage of deferred maintenance is and how it impacts, you know, the livability and well-being of our city and the people that use our parks. One of the questions that I heard you ask was, what information are we interested in? And I have curiosity, and I don't need super specifics, but I'm very curious about the sustainability efforts and the, oops, you moved. Oh, you just went off. Is he still here?
Sorry, Mike. Sorry. Yes, I'm here.
I'm like, I thought I lost you then. All right. But I'm curious about the sustainability, like different products and different things for building in a more modern and durable and sustainable and efficient infrastructure. So, like I said before, I keep hearing about this double laminated wood, and people go into the building and all the wood that was used has grown in the time that they do the tour in 40 minutes or something like that. It's a very renewable resource, but much more durable than the things that we currently have in the parks. And so those kinds of things I think are really important questions. If we really, in my mind, I've said it before, so it's not going to be a guessing game. I think a hybrid approach with a bond and a utility fee, so we don't fall into it again, but to have an infrastructure source of money so that we can do a good job of repairing and replacing assets in a way that's proactive and doesn't turn into more money. So those are that's some of the questions I have is, you know, what about LED lights, and what about efficient sprinkler systems, and what about durable materials that are renewable, but more durable than some of the old-fashioned things that we have that they are 30-year-old assets. So I don't want to get to a place, I mean, it's a little tough to be in a place where, we're in this, we're in a hole. And so I want to get out of the hole, but I want to do it in a smart way. And then I want to build in mechanisms that prevent us from getting here again, so that other councils don't have to face this, deferred maintenance issue. And I really appreciate all the work that all your staff is doing on behalf of the parks. I've said it before, if there's anything that people are doing right now, it's being able to spend time outside. The things that people say in my neighborhood that they appreciate about living in Tualatin is how green it is, how the trees are still here, how they can go to the parks. But at the same time, it's like embarrassing to have, you can't go across the bridge because you might, get hurt. And I don't want to feel like you're being neglectful to people who take their children to the parks or to their older relatives to the parks. And so I think for me, it's a priority, and it's really important. So thank you for your important work.
Thank you. Yeah, if I can just add really quickly, in our capital prioritization of our capital projects, environmental sustainability is one of the key criteria we're measuring, where we have an opportunity to improve our impact without selecting specific materials, but just indicating where that opportunity exists to make a significant improvement.
Valerie.
Yeah, I mean, you've shown us, which is great, like the deferred maintenance costs here on the 4s and 5s, and this might be a bigger project than is available for staff time, but I would really like to see, like on our street, I mean, on this park equipment and the maintenance and the upgrades that we know happen with this equipment in the parks, I would like to see it kind of like our streets, where we're, what it would cost in the budget to maintain, to keep it maintained. So maybe at some point in a few years, we could be up to 1s, 2s, and 3s. And what does it take to maintain those so we never get to a 4 or 5? Because with this equipment, I would assume, just like the streets, that it's a lot more costly to replace things than to just maintain them and keep them and upgrade them as we go along. So I guess the question is, would that be like an impossible thing to get a number on, or?
Yeah, so the number we presented is really a ballpark estimate of what it would take to replace and renovate all of the 4s and 5s. And if that mechanism is an ongoing dedicated source, we avoid getting in this pickle again, because then that ongoing dedicated source is there to replace aging assets when they're at the point where we can't operationally keep them going, or where it doesn't make sense to operationally keep them going. We have a source that can just replace those aged assets. You see projects like the common splash pad replacement, or the IBAC rubberized surfacing replacement. Those types of projects on an ongoing basis.
So your hand up, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Ross, there was a slide in there that talked about costs that are not included in the estimate. What percentage is that relative to the amount of costs that have been included in the estimate? Is it the same? Is it half that much?
Yeah, from a dollar perspective, I can't give you a good estimate. So, for example, what's not included are things like Browns Ferry Community Center, and where that facility has ADA access issues, where that facility really needs significant improvements. We don't, quite honestly, we have not allocated funds to do that work, to do that study, to figure out what that would take, and so that's why those are not included. So I wish I could give you a dollar amount, but we just don't know exactly at this point with those facilities primarily, what those costs are.
Sure, but I think one of them, the excluded cost was design and engineering.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's relatively substantial cost, right?
Yeah. So for design and engineering of the boat ramp, for example, at Community Park, we need to do that work to really understand, so that understand what the actual renovation replacement cost is. So that's why these are ballpark numbers, because we haven't done that design engineering work, and those design engineering numbers are not included in these totals.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to figure out how big the park is, if it's Coors Field or if it's Yellowstone. So I also wonder, we're collecting SDCs to build new capacity and bringing that online as we go. So under our current system, are we just exacerbating the problem of funding by building new things?
So as we look at all of the assets in their life cycle, new amenities and assets will take 20 plus years. In some types, maybe it's 15 years before we need to replace something, but most assets are 20-year lifespan. So those new amenities that we would be constructing with SDC dollars really have a long lifespan in front of them, that really don't need this type of capital investment.
Well, my concern is that that same mindset 10 or 15 years ago has led us to where we are today.
That's right.
And so before we can figure out how we're going to fund this, I think we need to know what it's going to cost, not next year, 5 years, but 10, 15 years down the road, so that we don't put in a system and then have to come back a couple of years later and say, oh, sorry, we've got to double that, and do that every couple of years. So while I'm very appreciative of the work that's been done, I don't feel like we've got a good enough grasp on what this total cost is going to be at this point to be able to develop a funding mechanism. I mean, right now it's 2.3 million a year to cover this 11.5 over 5 years. But we've already, acknowledged that there are certain costs that aren't included in that, and other items that may come along. So, I don't know what the solution is. I'm just looking at this from my perspective and saying I wish I had more information before I decide to levy, X amount of fee or put it on somebody's utility bill.
Certainly. One way to approach that would be looking at the percentages. And so as you look at our 4s and 5s, the percentage of the 4s and 5s of our total number of assets and amenities in our parks infrastructure is around 42%. So that leaves a pretty substantial percentage that beyond that first 5, in the next 15 or so, that would need investment, probably around that same level as those amenities age. The 60 something percent would need probably a similar level of investment.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right. Well, Robert took my question. We're thinking the same thing about, because I'm looking at the slide number 5 of Tualatin Community, Park boat ramp. You mentioned that's a multi-million-dollar project. And as you mentioned the slide before, a lot of things that would be increase the cost there, the two pop right away, as you mentioned before, project design and engineering, and then ADA, to make sure the boat ramp that we build is ADA compliant, which is not factored into the estimate. So as Councilor Kellogg was saying, the dollar amounts, I think, are significantly, I shouldn't say significantly, they're definitely higher in my mind for those items that are intangible at this time. And we'll really have to take a hard look at these numbers when we have to make that funding decision. All right, anything else? All right. Thanks, Ross and Rich.
Thank you.
Nancy.
Oh, Nancy had her hand up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you guys. And I certainly didn't mean to sound disparaging as far as how staff takes care of the facilities we have. I mean, they do an amazing job with as much as we have and what we're working with. I mean, amazing work. But to kind of build on something that Councilor Brooks said, and I'm not sure how would be the appropriate way to budget for it, but as we're looking ahead 10 years or 15 years or 20 years and trying to figure out a pricing and then, some sort of a revenue mechanism to meet that, I'd also like to be able to set some time, some money, and possibly some consultant time aside as part of the budget to look at like developing technologies that could help with the efficiencies of what we currently have, whether it's watering or lighting or different types of wood products or cement or just all of those areas where rather than trying to keep chasing the maintenance and redoing what was there, we take a look at like what's out there in the future that's coming that we could make an investment in, but that would pay us back either by being more environmentally friendly or just letting technology help us be more efficient in what we do. And also what is the next generation of park amenities going to look like, or play structures, and how do we get play structures that are more inclusive for like differently abled children that want to come and play in them. So I'd like to be able to keep a dialogue going about, looking forward for, new technology and new amenities, and work those into a plan also. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Make sure I double check my screen here. All right. Well, thank you, Ross and Rich. And I'm sure we'll hear back from you here in a future council meeting.
Thank you.
All right. So that brings us to reviewing the agenda for tonight's council meeting. Does anyone have any questions about items on the consent agenda? Don't see any hands up. Okay. That brings us to council communications. So I'll start off with who's first on my thing here? With Valerie.
I guess I just have a few things. At a few meetings I attended. There was a at the end of last month I attended an ARP Oregon towards more age funding housing webinar, and it was pretty interesting, especially considering the Basalt Creek area and other areas where we could be moving in the future. And it was really interesting, and I thought it was really informative. There's some just simple things that could be done with homes to really make them age friendly. Like one thing is just widening the areas so someone's in a wheelchair, they can, go from room to room. So I thought that was really useful. We had a meeting of the 12 Community Police Foundation, and I think mostly we're trying to deal with how to do the things we do, like in our COVID-19 pandemic era. And one of them was like with the Shop with a Cop program, we're going to delay it slightly just because we don't have communications to know who those kids are right now. And so we're just trying to deal with those kind of little issues. And one thing that Police Chief Steele mentioned that is that their domestic violence calls are down. And this is not because there's less domestic violence, because it's just not being reported. So that's somewhat troublesome. That's something we shall be concerned about. And then this morning, or this earliest afternoon, I was on the Suzanne Bonamici call, but there were 4 of us, so I'm gonna leave that one for someone else. Other than what I got out of it mainly was that we have a lot of similar topics we're all concerned about right now, and we need to just keep making our voices heard. And lastly, the thing I wanted to, I have a friend that lives in England, and they have this cool program where the government, if you go out to eat Mondays through Wednesdays, the government will pay up to 50% of 10 pounds of your meal, which we don't have here, but I still think we need to, if we can afford it, go out and support our local small restaurants and businesses. That's all I have.
Thank you. Maria.
Yes, I'm not gonna put my video, sorry. uh, so I attended two quite important meetings in the last 2 weeks. One was the I-205 tolling. That one was actually almost a recap of what we had already seen with the month, I think two Mondays ago. But it was a little bit more intense because there were more cities involved. And so I was able to hear other perspectives, what other, like Westland, Oregon City. So everyone in that Clackamas County area and people who are going to be affected by the tolling practically was there. But basically what they were talking about is a study. They are like in the preliminaries. It's very premature to determine where they're gonna put the tollings, or they have an idea where, and they're proposing some ideas, but they don't know how much that's gonna cost, where the money's gonna go to. So for instance, and I'm just gonna, this is just an example. So say they have one on Stafford Road, they're not sure. I asked if that money was gonna come to like to the cities that are involved, that are in that area. So they're not sure that's something that they're gonna look into later. But basically they're in the very early stages. They are looking at the DEI, or like making sure everything is inclusive and equitable. So a lot of just preliminary information about what they see or they foresee in the future for the tolling. So obviously I voiced my opinion about where we want in case that happens. So we talked about, you know, if there's going to be a tolling by Stafford, we don't want people to be diverted to our communities in that where the hospital, the clinics, the food pantry, the elementary, that area. And of course they actually are looking into that. And so just letting you know that I'm, you know, kind of voicing our opinions. And obviously we don't want anything, but you know, oh well, you know, it is going to happen. So we don't want any like tollings, but this is something that's going to move forward, and we're just going to have to continue to voice our opinion. I also attended another meeting called C-Force, and actually I was the alternate for Councillor Morrison. Basically it was the same thing, which was of interest of mine, the tolling. The meeting was a lot shorter, but just similar things, preliminaries. They are gonna have surveys. They're gonna use different groups, different populations to survey the area, survey the community, and so we can also voice our opinions. So they are encouraging us to participate in those surveys. That's basically in a quick, you know, just quick report. So, but I'm just, you know, I enjoy those meetings, and it was interesting to be part of that. Thank you.
Thanks for representing us there. Bridget.
Hi. I went to a few meetings. I went to the local leaders meeting with Rachel Prusak. Mostly there we get together with also school board members and discuss our approach to COVID. I've checked in about that before here. I will say that tolling, because Councilor Reyes brought that up, did come up. Of course, that was animated there as well. And I just want to remind people that are watching that they're looking for feedback right now to go to the website and tell them what you think of tolling in our area. And I've seen letters and things. I'm not convinced that it's going to move forward. So I'm leaving that door open. I just want to say that.
On that point, can I just interject?
Yes.
We will be Garrett will be before you on August 24th regarding the public comment period, which is a 45-day public comment period that ends on September 16th. And so the city of Tualatin is going to submit comments. And so we'll be in front of you to develop those comments, but also as a way of publicizing it. So if others want to make similar comments or use what you guys put together for their own comments, that will be useful to them, we hope.
Oh, thank you. That sounds great. Well, I'm looking forward to that. And so I'll hold off while we do it together. And then I'm sure my comments will be even better when I work with all you all. Also, August 13th is my next PAB meeting. The Community Action Network is going to be presenting. And what was it? I'm going to look at my note here. Between the state funding and the County CARES Act funding, Community Action Network has been approved $7.8 million. So they're going to give us an update on what they're doing. And like I said before, there's been some capacity and growth challenges. So they're going to be talking about how they're moving forward with all of that as well. So that will be interesting. And they put out some multilingual notices that I forwarded to our city manager, and the phone numbers, I'll put them out here right now. If somebody wants to grab a pen, if you need help with getting into housing, that number is 503-640-3263. So if you're out of housing and you need help getting into housing, it's 503-640-3263 is the phone number to call. And if you need help paying rent, so eviction prevention, that's 503-615-0770. And again, 503-615-0770. I too was on the Bonamici call today. One thing I posted on my Facebook page was she was the only congressional person from the Pacific Northwest to be on the committee that worked on the climate action plan. And so it's like a 500-page plus plan, and I posted on my Facebook page. But to know it's broken down into 12 pillars. So there's some bite-sized things if you're interested in learning more about what today's scientists say that good solutions for our climate crisis is. That would be something to look for. You can just look it up as far as the federal plan. It came out June 2020, so that'll help you find it. And then there were a lot of other questions, obviously, about tackling local issues here, because it was all Washington County leaders, and I'm sure the mayor will have more to say about that. And I think that, and tomorrow I'm going to an eviction crisis seminar as well. And that other committee, the planning committee for the homeless bond, TIP committee, that committee starts meeting, I think it's the 27th or the 28th. I'm not sure if it's been confirmed yet, but it'll be one of those 2 dates. So that'll be my first meeting of that, and I'll update you about how that goes. Nice to see everybody.
Great. Thank you. Robert.
Thank you, Mayor. Just two quick things on the tolling. Even though the mantle has been passed to Maria for the Clackamas County piece, I've still kept in touch with some people. And I wasn't able to attend it live, but I did see the notes from the R1 Act meeting on tolling. If you haven't seen those, I would recommend reviewing those briefly. the feeling that I'm getting is that there's some momentum building against the current plan, and that it may go back to Salem for additional direction at some point. So that, I think, is a positive. It helps address some of our concerns. The second thing, more locally concerning, talked with several business owners this week, and they're struggling. I know we have our Stimulus 2.0 plan, and I know Jonathan and Sherilyn are working hard at that. But if things are bad now, just imagine what they're going to be like in the winter. And so I really am looking forward to, I believe, our next council meeting where we're going to discuss the scope and size of our stimulus plan and how we can get that out quickly into the community. Because, as you all know, once some of these businesses close, the chances that somebody's going to come in and fill a vacant commercial space right now are not good. So please support your local businesses, as people have said, and let's get moving on this stimulus program. Thank you.
Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Real quick, just a couple of comments. I was also part of that Councilwoman Bonamici's meeting. What struck me, because I think all we read about is COVID-19 and CARES Act and CARES Act 2 and the fight between the Senate and the House. What struck me was all the other things that Congresswoman Bonamici is working on, including child care funding that would affect this area, obviously, a food nourishing program for the schools to get every child fed. As Councilor Brooks pointed out, the climate change, they're still working on that, moving forward with some policy. So it was just really interesting to hear from her and to get an update and to just get an update on things other than COVID, although she also updated on some of those issues there. Speaking of COVID, Tualatin Youth Soccer has a drop dead date of August 17th. Currently, there are no fields that are open. The school district will not let them use the fields. City parks are currently off limits to them. They are still keeping their fingers crossed. It was Trevor Owens, the president of Tualatin Youth Soccer, and as I read his email, you could literally feel him crying in between the sentences as he wrote to all the parents who have been involved in youth soccer. We've been involved in youth soccer for probably 12 years now here in Tualatin. Kids have been a part of it every year, and so it's quite sad. We are all keeping our fingers crossed, but at this point in time, there's not much hope. As Councilor Reyes pointed out, she attended on my behalf the C4 meeting, and thank you, Councilor Reyes, for attending. There was a letter that was voted on that, as Maria mentioned, she was part of a committee that put that letter together. I understand there were very little changes that were made to it. It went out along with the letter that was just referenced by Councilor Kellogg from the R1 Act committee assigned by the committee chair, Commissioner Roy Rogers. And I would agree with the assessment from Councilor Kellogg. There is clearly a momentum growing as everyone becomes aware of the fact that there is funding for every other major interstate and other state highway projects within the state, except for the 205, unless we do tolling. And that, it really begs the question of why. And then finally, just as a matter of housekeeping, and I don't know why, Sherilyn, I should have mentioned this to you earlier, but since we've now made Councilor Reyes the alternate to the C4, she should also probably, when she gets the paperwork in, to be an alternate to the C4 sub, which is a much smaller committee that meets on the third Thursday morning at 7:30 a.m. And I've been very fortunate. I've not yet missed a meeting, but like this last one, things come up with my kids, and I was unable to attend. And I appreciate Councilor Reyes for stepping in on short notice, because I got my new schedule for my son's baseball game literally Tuesday afternoon, and it clearly conflicted. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Council President Grimes.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate the opportunity right now for people to put public testimony and public comment in for tolling. It's exciting to hear that the legislature may take a look at that again. That's an exciting thought for me, but just to remind people to please use this time now to make your feelings known for that program. And I think that's it. That's it for me now.
All right. I just got a few things. Along with Valerie, I attended the AARP Age-Friendly Housing webinar. And as she pointed out, there are some terrific ideas that we might want to pull into our housing ideas for 2040, that you can have buildings that are both affordable and age-friendly at the same time. There are some terrific designs out there. It's being done all over the US. And the city of Portland was gracious enough to show about 3 of their projects that they've done successfully that incorporated either housing affordability, cottage clusters, the idea of having intergenerational housing, all kinds of cool things that are working out well that we may want to look at. On August 6th, myself and Chief Steele attended the 3rd and final Obama Foundation webinar. And this was one of the most important ones. It was how to create a representative and open public review process. So we're going to take what we learned from there and start shaping our review process of our police use of force. That's one of the things we did as part of our mayor's pledge. Folks already talked about Representative Bonamici's meeting this afternoon or this morning. The one thing I got back from her, like Paul mentioned, is the House of Representatives is busy doing other things in addition to COVID, but her outright frustration with the Senate on dealing with the critical issue that needs to be taken care of right now of getting money in people's pockets to pay for those COVID-related job losses and costs that they've let lapse. They knew this was coming and they just haven't gotten around to getting to the deal. They need to get to a deal. Later this afternoon, I attended the Washington County Chair Mayor's meeting, where the subject of discussion was, if you're a political wonk, you've been reading it, the whole idea of decoupling from Multnomah County. There's quite the fear that Multnomah County might go backwards as far as COVID. And right now, Washington County, Multnomah County, and Clackamas County are all considered one region. And so both Clackamas County and Washington County are very fearful that Multnomah County, with their numbers, is going to set us backwards. So both county chairs, Washington County Chair and Clackamas County Chair, have written letters to the governor asking for decoupling. And so far, it's been a gracious no, you're going to stay coupled. So keep your eyes on that. Hopefully, Multnomah County won't go backwards. Hopefully, their numbers will stabilize, as Washington County's has and Clackamas County. We're not in that predicament, but Multnomah County is struggling. And that's it for me. Anything else? Nancy.
I just thought of one, the other thing that I wanted to add. I just wanted to reiterate so that people, anybody listening, might remember that even though the library is closed as far as the way that we normally have used it in the past, it is still available if you go online and reserve and put on hold materials from the library, whether it's books or music or movies or whatever. You can make appointments for curbside pickup of those items at the library. And there's information on the main City of Tualatin homepage of the website. So I just want to encourage people to, even though we're not using the library in the traditional way, it is still available for us and for everybody that's stuck at home and is looking for reading or viewing or listening materials or books for children. It is still available through the library. We just have to go through a little bit different routine than we've done in the past. But the main library number is 503-691-3074, and the information about how to schedule a time to pick up your items that you reserve online for a hold is on the main page of the Tualatin City website. So I wanted to remind everybody, because everybody uses our library in a big way.
All right. With that, I'll go ahead and close this meeting and we'll go into recess for our city council meeting, which will start in about 3 minutes.